Greetings viewers, in this video we will look at the performance uplifts you can expect from upgrading to the next Emu68 core version 1.1. I am here showcasing an early pre-release version that will show us the expected performance and a few improvements we will get with the next release. A huge thanks to Michael Schultz, Claude and Rondoval and the rest of the team for their work on Emu68 1.1 and the development for the Pistorm in general. I will briefly look at the alpha version of the XHCI USB driver for the pi3.pi3b. As it stands, it is a welcome addition to the Pistorm. I have tested a DVD drive, several pen drives, sound cards, keyboards and mice. It all works, but the driver is a work in progress and somewhat unstable on the two different pi4s I have tried. All testing is done with the same Amiga 1200, the same Pistorm 32 adapter, but with two different SD cards running the latest Caffeine OS upgraded to OS 3.2.3 with the Butcher patcher. One SD card is upgraded with the latest Emu68 1.1 Alpha 1 firmware, while the other is running Emu68 version 1.0.7. For testing I primarily use 3D games to see what uplift we get with each Raspberry Pi model. The reason I have tested so many different Pi options is that someone may not be able to run a Pi4 in their Pistorm Classic, example Amiga 500, 1000, 2000 and CD-TV, and perhaps they would like to know if the next patch matters to them at all. Spoiler, if you're using a Pistorm 32 and stuck with a pi3a Plus or similar, there is simply no reason not to upgrade except for the 3A's variant running very cool. That is unless you are more than happy with the performance you currently have. You may have noticed that I did not include the popular pi3a Plus in my testing. I did order one from a UK web shop together with another Pistorm 32 adapter for this testing, but I'm guessing the reseller has none in stock as it has been several weeks and nothing has been shipped yet. However, the pi3b Plus I tested is identical to the pi3a Plus performance wise, apart from 1GB RAM on the 3B Plus and a standard Pi form factor, where a 3A Plus is smaller and only has 512 MB of RAM, both using the same better built SoC and better Wi-Fi, and also contains a heat spreader on top of the SoC. I also tested the overclocking the models as well to see how much extra performance we can squeeze out and how the Emu68 update compares to the overclock. The 1.1 update is also benchmarked with the same overclock and stock speeds. A total of 5 different Raspberry Pi models were tested when making this video. However, due to how similar the CM4 performs to the pi3.pi3b, I only included the CM4 in the charts. 3 different models based on the Pi3 system on a chip, the pi3b, the pi3b Plus and the pi02w, all running the rather dated ARM Core-X A53. 2 pi4 models, pi3b 4GB and the CM4. The pi3b is the most interesting here as the USB alpha driver is also tested, while the CM4 is not yet supported for USB. So what do we get with 1.1, you may ask? There is a lot. The code got cleaned up and is now more efficient, and JIT is running also more efficiently. This is the point I will look at the most in this video. The new and first CM4 based Pistorm 16 for the Amiga 600 is now officially supported, along with the Flamethrower 600. Changes made in order to take advantage of Rondoval's USB, LAN and PCI drivers so they function correctly. The PPC framework is in place, it's not enabled anytime soon I guess, as more work there is needed. JIT dumpster is fixed, so I can happily inform you that the Mac emulation seems to boot okay and Mac applications run fine. No more need to limit the Pi to 2GB in the config txt anymore. For Raspberry Pi 4 models with more than 2GB, as the ARM chip can use more than 2GB, that the Amiga OS is limited to use. The games I have benchmarked here are Quake 1, Quake 2 and Heretic 2. I initially also included Settlers 2, but since my test map would vary from run to run, I excluded that game after some thought, as even the stock Zero2 will run that game fine with 25 FPS in 1024 by 768. Note I focused mostly on performance uplifts for the Emu68 update here, and if the demand is big enough, I will make a whole video for all the Pi models to compare them in many tests, like read, write, productive boot, etc. But I cannot stress this enough, the Pi 4 variant is in a different ballpark altogether than the Pi3 based SPCs, as not only does it have a much faster CPU, it also has much faster LPDDR4 memory than the LPDDR2 found on the older Pi models. I found when overclocking the Pi3 based models that a DDR overclock was almost as important as CPU frequency. The Pi 4 is not so bandwidth limited and does not care so much about RAM overclock. The funny thing is, when testing an overclocked Pi 4 on the older core, is almost identical performance to what you get on the new core running stock speeds. If we look at the results for the new 1.1 update, it does indeed give us a better efficiency in the few games tested, but seems to be more effective on the Pi 4 models, while also giving a nice little boost to the lower end models. The green bar in the charts always represent 1.07 and the red represents the 1.1 alpha in all charts. Raw data will be attached in the end of the video for those interested, as well as linked in the description of this video. This data chart will show all the FPS numbers for all Pi models in all resolutions tested. Apple to apples testing for the Pi 3 versus the Pi 4 is not done. I choose resolutions that makes more sense based on how powerful the models are. Two examples would be Quake 1 in 320 by 240 gets like 150 FPS on an overclocked Pi 4. And Heretic 2 does yield better frame rates for the Pi 4 in 320 by 240, but it makes more sense to play that game in 640 by 480 as it looks very ugly in a lower res. On the Pi 3, the 640 by 480 option is not performant enough, and a compromise to make the game playable was made. First, let's look at the relative performance uplift we get with the 1.1 update. In this slide we will see that the Pi models are running at stock speeds, resolution 640 by 480 in Quake 1. We are getting anywhere from 7 to 15% on the Pi 3 models, while the CM4 is getting a whopping 30% at this resolution. Next comparison is the overclocked results. The story does not change much, ranging from a 9 to almost 15% uplift with the Pi 3 cards, while again 27% for the improvement for the CM4, but just changing a few files on the SD card. Let's now look at the CM4 Quake 1 results. Again, remember the 30-ish% I mentioned. If we look at the chart, an overclocked 2.3 GHz CM4 running 1.07 is on par with a stock CM4 in 1.1. Pretty epic stuff. Going from a CM4 running stock speeds in 107 to 1.1 with an overclocked Pi will give us nearly 60% more performance. In 1280 by 720, the update alone pushed the stock CM4 to 33 FPS from 24 FPS with 1.07. This is very noticeable in my opinion. it makes this widescreen resolution pretty playable. In the 1280 by 720 widescreen resolution, I see a 38% performance improvement with the overclocked Pi, with just updating from 1.07 to the 1.1 update. Next up, we are still looking at Quake 1, but now the whole Pi3 stack. Resolutions here are based again on trying to keep the game at playable frame rates. We want a minimum of 30 FPS in 3D games where you have free movement in the XYZ axis. While most Pi3 models tested pretty good in the 640 by 360 widescreen resolution, the stock Zero2 is most happy at 320 by 240. 1.1 improvements, while not the silly 30% on the CM4, we still usually see between 7 to 50% here, sometimes allowing performance to crawl above the 30 FPS line in a higher res where 107 would stay below. When looking at the results for Quake 2 with the CM4 benchmarks, the trend continues with good improvements shown with the new 1.1 update, generally around 30% across the board. But the software renderer is also abusing this Pi, where 30 FPS is now unobtainable in 1024 by 768. For this game, an overclock together with the 1.1 update makes a lot of sense. Now we are looking at the Pi3 and Quake 2. I think we are getting to the point where the Pi3 variants are starting to struggle a bit. We are getting FPS in the 20s no matter what we do, and leaving the game in 320 by 240 is a very good idea. This may be playable to some, but for me it is a bit too unresponsive for a faster action shooter. The same 7 to 14% uplift is here as well, but going from say 20 to 24 FPS does not help a whole lot. My poor Zero2 won't even hit 15 FPS when running the stock 1 GHz. Heretic 2 is possibly the hardest Amiga port to run on our Pistorms, especially with a software/CPU render, here tested with the CM4. For some reason this game does not look too great at a lower resolution than 640 by 480, and also feels unsmooth with anything less than 35 frames per second. Maybe it's due to the combination of third-person view and free movement. I can say that finally the game is enjoyable to play on my computer, getting 35 FPS in the 848 by 480 widescreen mode. But to get there I needed Emu68 1.1 and also a heavily overclocked CM4. Now for the Pi3 variants. Well, I'm not going to lie, Heretic 2 was not enjoyable to play on any of the models here. You have to keep the resolution so low that the details in this game become too blurry, making it effectively a tech demo more than a playable experience. Even though performance uplifts was also seen here, I did not feel like they made much of a whole difference. All in all, looking at this very limited test data, I have also used each accelerator setup for several days, trying to spot issues with the new 1.1. To be honest, the Pi02W has been my favorite A53 based accelerator. It is so cool and small, but yet so much for so little money. Certainly not the fastest, well, actually it's the slowest. Good for everything not Quake 2 or Heretic 2, and maybe also not upscaled Diablo, but for everything else, this thing is pretty sweet. To me, the pi3.pi3b or the CM4 is the biggest winner here. Not only do they get the best performance boost, they also have the most active development for PCI, LAN and USB stuff. The Pi3 has pretty poor USB hardware and with the focus on the Pistorm 16, I doubt a lot of further development will be done there anytime soon. The Pi4 can now use the USB controller and connect to different peripherals with 1.1. In fact, this whole script, all the stuff I have said for this whole video, has been written with an external USB keyboard on my white Amiga 1200 together with a modern optical gaming mouse. It has been problem-free for the past few days. Yesterday I played Devolution X Diablo for 6 hours straight with a USB mouse, problem-free. Now, I'm not saying that the USB driver is done. Try to open any 3D game, for example, with a USB sound card setup in AHI, and the system will crash 9 out of 10 times. The file transfer speed is pretty decent as well, around 30 megabytes a second to transfer files. In my test setup I used a powered USB hub only because I was unsure if the audio issues I was having was due to either my power supply or my Amiga. Turns out two different motherboards did not change much, so I guess it's just software quirk for now. The USB stuff still needs to mature, and I'm confident it will in due time. When you install the release candidate on your computer, it may have already been solved. Who knows? Mac emulation is now usable with this update. I did play 2 campaign maps of Warcraft 2 on my Pi4, and it did feel nice and stable. However, I did not get it to run on one of the Pi3 based systems, so I cannot tell if it really works as intended or if it was just that one Pi. For the time being, I'm done swapping around Pis in the Pistorm 32, as it is a lot of work, and I'm probably gonna look another day to see if the Mac emulation is working fine on the Pi3s. It may not look as much, but testing this many different Raspberry Pis in one computer takes a lot of effort. For each tested SD card, I ran a config for stock and one for overclocked. 2 cards, 4 tests in each resolution times 5 Pis. And you can do the maths, it's pretty hectic. Overclocking the Pi3 models, by the way, is not as forgiving as it is on the Pi4. You will have less headroom and you have to stress test it to make sure it's stable. My setup has a small centrifugal fan blowing on the Raspberry Pi at all times, keeping stuff cool. I cannot guarantee that you would have the same luck as I had without some extra cooling. After all, chips are different. Some overclock well, others don't. The Pi4 tends to run much hotter than the Pi3, just by nature. The most obvious safe overclocking candidate would be the CM4 with active cooling. So to conclude things, the next Emu68 version will contain several improvements to not just stability but also add features and perform better. It has been a game changer for Heretic 2 alone, and I have just scratched the surface here. I guess there are many use cases where the added efficiency will make the Pistorm experience much better. But now it's about time I ended this video. It's already getting pretty long. So if you're even still here, I would like to thank you for watching, and until next time, I bid you farewell.